In the next 4 lessons, we are going to be looking at a different type of creation operator than we have seen in the past. Instead of creating an observable from an event source or some other data, these operators create an observable by joining together multiple other observables, emitting values based on certain patterns. The first of these creation operators we will be looking at is merge. Merge lets you create an observable from a variable number of other observables you supply. Then, on subscription, merge subscribes to all inner observables at once, emitting all values emitted by any of these observables as they occur. So, in this example, anytime observable 1 or 2 emits any values, these values are emitted by merge. Let's take a look at a few examples to see how this works in practice and how we can put merge to use. Let's start with a stream of keyup events and a stream of click events created using fromEvent. If you wanted to subscribe to both of these streams, one way would be just to call subscribe on each. For instance, I'll call subscribe on the keyup observable, and I'll also call subscribe on the click observable. When I save, any clicks or keyup events are logged to the console. So this is one way to do it, but let's see how we can use merge instead to combine these streams, subscribing to both observables at once. So let's go ahead and import merge now. Because merge is a static creation operator, it will be imported from the base RxJS path. Unlike other creation operators we have seen so far in the course though, merge creates an observable by joining together other observables, instead of an event source like fromEvent, or pre-existing data like of or from. Now that we have merge imported, let's put it to use. Merge accepts any number of observables as arguments, so in this case, we'll just supply the keyup and click observables that we created above. On subscription, merge will subscribe to all of these observables internally, emitting any emitted values as they occur. So in our case, since we are just logging these values to the console, there won't be any visible difference between the behavior of these merge observables and the 2 subscriptions above. And let's go ahead and comment out these other subscriptions so we can keep things straight. Now let's save and see how this looks. So when I click on the document, or press any key, we see the exact same behavior as before. At this point, you're probably wondering when it's worth merging your observables together versus subscribing individually. And the answer is, it really depends on your use case. For instance, in this case, it makes sense just to merge these streams together because the end result of both is just logging the emitted values to the console. But this is sort of a contrived example. In most cases, the way you will handle emissions from one stream will differ greatly from how you handle another. Maybe the keyup stream is updating one section of your UI or making a certain API request, while the click stream is managing something completely different. With merge, there really has to be a unified reason you want to take action based on a combination of multiple streams. To see a more real-world use case where it makes sense to use merge, let's step back to our countdown timer example from previous lessons to see how we can enhance this functionality now that we have the merge operator available. In this example, we used interval and scan to create a timer that counts down from 10 to 0. We also added take while in order to complete the observable once a value is received that is less than 0, and take until to be able to stop the timer if the user clicks the abort mission button. Finally, at the beginning of the chapter, we updated this example to use start with to emit the initial countdown value immediately on subscription. So this is working pretty well, but there are still a couple of features we could add. First, it's probably not ideal to start the countdown on page load. Instead, let's give the user the option of when to begin the timer by clicking a button. Second, right now, clicking this abort mission button completes the observable, and at this point, there is no way to restart. Let's actually update this to instead give the user the ability to pause and restart this countdown as many times as they wish before the timer hits 0. So to begin, let's go ahead and create another button to start the timer. So let's just copy this abort mission button, and we'll update the label here to say start timer. Next, let's also update this label to say pause timer. And we'll switch out the ID to pause as well, and we'll give this an ID of start. Now let's make a small CSS update to differentiate our buttons. So we'll copy out these styles that we can share, and we'll just apply them for both the start and the pause ID. Next, let's change this ID of abort to pause, and we're going to add a style for our start ID, and we'll just give this a background of green. Finally, let's go back to our JavaScript file and fix up all of our references. So this abort button we'll now call pause button, and we need to switch the ID to pause. And for our start button, we're just going to copy this, and we'll change this constant to start button and give it an ID of start. We also need to create a stream for these start button clicks. So let's come down, and we'll copy this abort click stream, and we're going to switch this out to start click. And to be consistent, we'll switch this out to pause click now, and we actually need to update this to pause button as well. And we'll use the start button as the target here. Now that we have all the elements and streams in place that we will need, let's talk through how we can add our start and pause functionality. So instead of immediately subscribing to this counter and beginning the countdown on page load, we want the user to be able to initiate it based on this start click stream. So let's go ahead and replace the counter here with our start click stream. And whenever this emits a value, we need to map to our counter instead. Because the counter is an observable, we will also need to flatten it. Since we know we will never want more than one active counter, let's use switch map as our default. So let's go ahead and add the switch map import now. And let's come back down and we'll add it into our stream. So on any emissions from the start click stream, let's switch to the counter observable, which is just the interval that emits every 1 second. This will then execute the rest of our countdown logic like before. And actually, we won't be completing the observable anymore based on an abort button, so we can go ahead and remove this take until operator. Now let's save and we'll see how this is looking as a checkpoint. At this point our timer doesn't start on page load, and clicking the start timer button begins the countdown. Unfortunately though, we no longer have a way to stop the timer, and clicking start again really does nothing but restart this internal interval. So we need to be able to consider this pause click stream along with the start click stream and stop the countdown whenever the pause click stream emits a value. To do this, let's use merge to provide both streams as input. So let's go ahead and add the merge import now. And for our observable here, let's actually merge together both the start click and pause click streams. Now, we also need a way for switch map to know whether to keep the interval running or pause it on any emissions. So for the start click stream, let's map any emitted values to true using the map2 operator. And for the pause click stream, let's map all emitted values to false. Now in switch map, we can make a decision about what to do depending on which button was clicked. So let's call this argument we receive should start so it's more clear. And if the argument is true, let's map to the same counter interval as before. But if it's false, what should we do? Well, the answer is really nothing. And anytime you need an observable that does basically nothing, you can think of empty. So let's go ahead and add one last import now for empty. And in the case of the pause button clicked, we will just map to an empty observable instead. Before we save, let's talk this whole thing through one more time to make sure it all makes sense. So we are now merging our button click streams together using the merge operator. We are also emitting true or false depending on whether the countdown should be started or paused. If it should be started, we are mapping to the counter to emit a value every 1 second. If not, we are switching to an empty observable, which will just act as a way to pause the countdown as it completes emitting no values. Let's save one last time and see it all in action. Now when I click start timer, we can see the countdown begins. And when I click pause, the timer pauses. Clicking start again will restart the timer, and we can keep starting and pausing until the countdown finally reaches 0, and liftoff is displayed. To recap, merge joins together multiple observables, emitting any values emitted by any of these observables. You should use merge when unifying the emissions of observables solves or relates to a common problem or piece of functionality, like we saw in the countdown example.